Our brains make up 2% of our body mass, yet account for up to 25% of our energy consumption in a day. Thinking is exhausting. Yet when we seek efficiency in our lives, we rarely consider efficiency of thinking. We should, and here's why. Cognitive capital. I've done some research and I can't find any other use of this term, so I'm going to assume I coined it. A couple of definitions are in order. Cognition is the means by which we acquire knowledge. It involves our intellect, but it is also influenced by our assumptions, biases, feelings, expectations, and other such components. In a more clinical sense, cognition requires activation of the prefrontal cortex, which is closely tied to complex behavioral patterns and decision-making, as well as the limbic system, which is involved in emotional and social behavior. Sensory input is also a major contributor to cognition. Capital is anything of value which is used to create additional value. This includes financial assets, which are used to improve the production and profitability of companies holding those assets. Other assets include land, equipment, materials, and supplies. Communities have social assets, such as clubs and organizations. Communities also have cultural assets, such as museums and educational institutions. Some entities serve as both social and cultural assets. Churches and music venues are examples of this. Communities use their capital to improve the quality of life they provide, which has value to the residents. Assets, and therefore capital, have long been thought of as physical items, objects that can be sold or otherwise exchanged. In recent decades, there's been an emphasis on more ethereal assets. Loyalty, teamwork, and corporate culture are all examples of this type of capital. They are used to create value, but cannot be sold or exchanged. Communities often speak of their social capital, which is the social characteristics used to create value for the community and its residents. And let's differentiate between wealth and capital. Wealth is not capital. Wealth is accumulated riches. Capital is leveraged value. Wealth pretty much just sits there. Capital goes to work. Like virtually everything else, capital is limited. Businesses know this. They strive to derive benefit from any capital expenditure. ROI, or return on investment, is key to a successful business. They often cannot generate enough capital to run their business as it should be run. That's why they have capital partners, business entities that exist solely to provide capital to other businesses. Actually, any debt is capital when used for the acquisition of resources that enhance productivity and value. Like all forms of capital, cognitive capital is limited and we can eventually run out. We've all had grueling days at work or in class where our cognitive capacity is utterly drained. It seemed literally impossible to think anymore until we had a chance to recover. Our neocortices and limbic systems were barely functional. Our brainstems kept us breathing, kept us putting one foot in front of the other, but higher orders of thinking were not possible until we spent time in a place of refuge and rest. The question then is, did I use my cognitive capital to build value in my life, or did I squander it on junk? It's my observation that the vast majority of people spend a lot of their cognitive capital on junk. To not do so requires deliberate intent and mindfulness, which seems sorely lacking in today's American society. What are some examples of cognitive junk? People were going to great lengths recently to develop a personal mask protocol to defend or deny the importance of masks. People continue to fiercely defend their view of vaccines, informed only by what common culture and their own confirmation bias tell them. I should mention here, this is being uploaded while our country, indeed the whole world, is struggling to emerge from the grip of COVID. But in nearly 7 decades of life, I've seen cognitive capital spent on everything from the Beatles, to the civil rights, to the war in Vietnam, to disco music. That's not to say these topics didn't warrant consideration, but most people who immersed themselves in these matters squandered their cognitive capital on them, leading lives of quiet desperation, and dying in obscurity to all but those few who by genetics or happenstance knew them personally. In round numbers, that's 8.5 million calories burned as a thinking adult with minimal gain. Where do you spend your cognitive capital? Ford versus Chevy? Toyota versus Honda? Domestic versus import? Folk versus New Age? Wallpaper versus paint? Cats versus dogs? Crocs versus Keens? Do you consider yourself an expert on beer, coffee, pointillism? Funneling your cognitive capital into these and similar topics does not make you a better person, does not make the world a better place. Even worse is when we waste our cognitive capital deliberating on how others apply their cognitive capital to such topics. I use my cognitive capital to think critically about my thinking. I research cognitive flaws and vulnerabilities and try to root them out of my own cognitive processes. I use my improved cognition to assess and reassess the world around me. I share what I've learned with those I love. Of course, this includes my wife, our son, our grandkids, but it also includes neighbors and acquaintances and even strangers I meet along my life's journey because, after all, I love them too. It's up to you to figure out the best use of your cognitive capital. I hope at the very least I've helped you appreciate the value of doing so. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you got value from this video, please support me by subscribing to my Patreon platform or by making a one-time contribution through PayPal or both. Links are in the description. I'm Rich Reese, and I'll see you out there. Communities often speak of their social capital, which is the social characteristics used to create value for community. Good heavens. Communities often speak of their social capital, which is the social characteristics used to create value for the community and its residents.